Hi everyone. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be there in person. My name's Dr. ML White, and today, as your chair and discussant, I'm tasked with keeping us to time, commenting on the papers that we'll hear soon, and posing questions to help us begin our discussions on the projects, the case studies of youth media as intercultural experience that you're going to hear about today. As Yonte is in the room, I think the first task of timekeeping will be much more effectively completed by him. Yonte, I hope that's okay. So 2 years ago, Yonte and I convened a panel here at ICA to talk about how media literacy practices might be developed in high poverty contexts. And in my paper, I talked about a project situated at the intersections of media education, teacher education, and civic engagement in order to explore the relationship between civic media pedagogy and teacher education. Now, this project was conceived as an intensive 5-day experience of making media, of civic reflection, and curriculum development, working with soon to be teachers in the local community to develop practical, engaged, pedagogical strategies. The aim of the research project was to consider how we might support educators to develop the knowledge, the skills, and practices to use youth media practices as tools for exploring issues of poverty, of race, and civic engagement in their own classrooms and ultimately impact on the communities in which they worked, the schools in which they taught. In this project, as in many youth media projects, participants produced a video inquiry, reflected on their experience as learners, as facilitators, and as teachers, and learn how to practice what Ladson Billings in 1995 described as a culturally responsive pedagogy, integrating the principles of media education, of critical literacy, and civic engagement. These terms, media education, critical literacy, critical media literacy, and civic engagement, are important in the projects you'll hear about today. Since that time, since ICA 2 years ago, I've continued to work with and to think about youth media and civic media educations, and of course, and as part of that, the terms we use to describe our work. I think it's worth beginning by stating that civic media is not new, but of course there are complications in the 21st century. The term has multiple meaning and is used alongside and in place of a number of other terms. It's used differently in different contexts and used synonymously with the terms digital and participatory. Civic media has, of course, always been participatory by nature, and today social media and digital technologies have both facilitated the spread of information among networks of individuals and reduced barriers to community building and organising across geographies, more of which we'll hear about from our panellists today. But before we move on to that, let me take a moment to remind you of some key definitions. In 2000, in Civic Responsibility in Higher Education, Elric said that, and this is a quotation, civic engagement means working to make a difference in the civic lives of our communities and developing the combination of knowledge, skills, values, and motivation to make that difference. It means promoting the quality of life in a community through both political and non-political processes. Henry Jenkins, 7 years later in 2007, suggests that civic media, quote, refers to civic media refers to any use of any medium which fosters or enhances civic engagement. And helpfully, he stated his desire for this definition to be as broad and inclusive as possible. In an edited text from Gordon and Michailidis, civic media is described as any mediated practice that enables a community to imagine themselves as being connected, not through achieving, but through striving for a common good. Now, the purpose of our panel today is to continue conversations that are already taking place, conversations that are taking place with scholars and practitioners from multiple fields and disciplines about civic media education, in order that we can better understand and perhaps develop new methods of research and practice to promote social justice, tolerance, empathy, and intercultural communication. I look forward now to hearing from each of the panellists. Thank you. So each of the panellists has offered us an insight not only into the work that they're engaged in, but the context they work in, the geographical, emotional and intellectual context they work in, and the interests, the concerns and the experience of their participants. Now, in my reading of their papers, I want to note the following points. Firstly, that their work is located in and off place, from Philadelphia to South Africa for a media making workshop on social justice. That building from the landmark work of Gloria Ladson Billings on developing culturally relevant pedagogies, we see in the materials produced and learn about the importance of a teaching process or a facilitation process that supports young people to succeed academically and socially while respecting their cultural heritage and social identities. And in each of these case studies, I'm reminded that the development and focus on critical literacies expands notions of reading and writing to, of course, include images and sounds and popular culture, but more importantly, deepens the ability to critically analyse the relationship between knowledge and power in society. In all of these projects that we've heard about today, they grow, and I believe that they grow, although the panellists may have a different position, and I look forward to hearing from that, but they grow, I think, out of dialogue and action. And here it's worth going back to Freire, who encompasses that civic aim of education in his conception of education as the practice of freedom. So in each of these projects there are, I think, a number of common themes and issues. Issues of equity, of concerns with access to technology, to tools, to resources and to support. Issues of pedagogy, of power relationships, of the struggles with production and the visibility for youth voice. And issues of identity, a consideration of the performance of self, of working with others whom we might describe as different to ourselves, and of the need for representations of complexity, of difference, and of a boundary crossing and boundary crossers. And so from the papers today, I want to make 4 observations about civic media. Firstly, the medium of interaction, the tool or the technology alone, is not enough. It must be coupled with social practices and pedagogical design to engage people in participation. And those people are participants and those who are involved. Secondly, civic media is not only social, but it's intentional. As teachers, practitioners, academics, and researchers, we must design scaffolding to support that social interaction and the dialogue, and that this interaction and dialogue must serve a community purpose and action. Thirdly, communities are not just bounded by place, but by shared interests, values, and experiences. And thinking about the digital tools employed in these projects reminds me of Dana Boyd's conception of the networked public, representing, and I quote from Boyd, imagines communities that emerge as the result, or are result, sorry, of the intersection of people, technology, and practice. And that's in our 2014 text. And finally, as each of the presenters has so eloquently described, civic media education practices must connect to the attributes of communities, the communities they are located within. So I want to end my section, I want to end by thanking each of the presenters for sharing their work. And I've had the great pleasure of looking at the videos and the materials, the media associated with this work, and reading complete papers. And so from this, and after reviewing that, I want to raise some questions that I hope we will have time to discuss. How might civic media education practices be developed in a world characterised by increasing diversity, economic disparity and inequality, and, as is commonplace throughout the world, increasing intolerance? What practices, what learning and teaching might be considered appropriate and effective in civic media education when we are concerned with issues of social justice? Indeed, what might this mean, and how can it be more than a mere slogan? Like all research and all projects, these projects are temporally located. So how is a sense of place manifested, and what are the principles that might be developed and used in other places? How might local, national and cultural expectations shape the pedagogical principles and practices that guide the development of civic media education practices? And finally, and I think this is a concern for all of us, what's the role of research in our work? I'm sorry I'm not there in person, physically, to discuss this with you, but I look forward to the discussion and hopefully, if technology works, to take in part. Thank you.